Welcome back to Biographics. I'm your host, Eric Malachite, and today's video was written by Radu Alexander, so be sure to show him some love in the comments as you deploy your likes, subscribe and ring that bell if you haven't, and share this video with someone who loves learning about historical figures. Let's get to it. Who do you call when you're one of the most feared gangsters in the world and you need someone taken out? In the case of Al Capone, the answer was Jack McGurn, a kid who experienced firsthand the heartbreak that mob violence could bring. McGurn had a promising boxing career ahead of him before dropping it and embracing the same kind of violence he was once the victim of, and he never looked back. It's almost shocking just how fast Jack McGurn and his trusty Tommy gun rose through the ranks of Capone's Chicago outfit, until he became the boss's go-to guy whenever someone needed to take a dirt nap. McGurn had his hands in everything, from taking out Al Capone's biggest rivals to protecting him from assassins, and of course, the infamous Valentine's Day Massacre. Jack McGurn was born Vincenzo Gibaldi on July 2, 1903 in Licata, Sicily, the eldest son of Tommaso Gibaldi and Giuseppe Verderame. A few years after Vincenzo was born, the Gibaldis left Italy, immigrated to the United States, and settled in Brooklyn. Tommaso sailed across the Atlantic Ocean in the hopes of finding a better life for his family. Unfortunately, he found the exact opposite, a world teeming with violence at every corner. A world that ultimately claimed his life when Tommaso Gibaldi was murdered in broad daylight while getting his shoes shined. He was gunned down by two members of an Irish gang known as the White Handers, who mistook him for a criminal from a rival Italian mob. Some years later, his widow remarried to a grocer named Angelo De Mora, and the entire family moved to Chicago. Vincenzo was around 14 years old at the time and had recently taken up boxing. Turns out he was good at it. So good, in fact, that there was talk of him turning pro. It was then that Vincenzo Gibaldi decided to adopt the ring name of Battling Jack McGurn, because he thought that Irish boxers were more popular than Italian ones. Later, Gibaldi kept using the Jack McGurn moniker during his criminal career to avoid shaming the family name. On November 4th, 1921, McGurn made his professional boxing debut and won the bout on points. His second and third fights followed in early 1922. Even though Jack took on more experienced boxers, both bouts ended in draws. Although things seemed to be looking up for Jack McGurn, there was still a dark cloud looming over his head: his father's murder. The idea that Tommaso Gibaldi's killers were walking the streets of New York at that very moment, free as a bird, was something that McGurn simply couldn't stomach. And if nobody else would give him justice, he would take it himself. In 1922, shortly after his 19th birthday, Jack took some time off and traveled to New York City to settle an old score. McGurn had 3 targets in his sights: the 2 guys who shot his father and the head of the White Handers, a man named Wild Bill Lovett. His first victim, McGurn approached one night as the man pulled into his driveway. He shot him 3 times point blank, killing him before he touched the ground. But he wasn't finished. Jack emptied the revolver's 6 chambers into the body and then reloaded it and emptied it again and again and again. Years of burning anger and resentment exploded all at once as Jack McGurn killed his first man by shooting him 24 times. The other 2 didn't have this kind of overkill. For the second shooter, McGurn waited for him to arrive home. Once he heard the main building entrance open, he hid in the shadows and fired 6 bullets into the man as he was unlocking his apartment door. Lovett, by comparison, got lucky. Jack climbed the fire escape to his second-floor apartment and shot him once through the window. Lovett was hit, but had the presence of mind to fall to the ground and reach for his piece. Once again, McGurn emptied the barrel, but only hit Lovett 2 more times. Some White-Handers were coming to their boss's aid, so Jack didn't have time to reload and finish the job. Lovett was rushed to the hospital and survived the encounter, although he was gunned down in a bar just a year later. So, eventually he got what was coming to him. Jack McGurn returned to Chicago ready to resume his boxing career, but it was clear that he wasn't the same man anymore. He shot 3 people, and although there was no doubt in his mind that they deserved it, there was also no doubt that he enjoyed it. All he needed was one more push to put him on a darker, more violent path for good. He got that the following year. Thanks to Prohibition, bootlegging had become a goldmine for criminals like the Terrible Jennas, one of the most ruthless gangs in Chicago. People in Little Italy had to cooperate with them whether they liked it or not. People like Jack's stepfather, Angelo DeMora, who used his grocery store to provide the Jennas with the sugar they needed to keep their stills producing cheap hooch around the clock. But the Jennas found out that DeMora also sold sugar to other bootleggers, so on the morning of January 8th, 1923, DeMora was gunned down in front of his store. One of the first people on the scene was McGurn, who, for the second time in his life, watched his father get killed by criminals. Jack was now the man of the family and had to provide for his mother and younger siblings. Unfortunately, it had become clear that boxing would not be the way to do it. The transition from amateur to pro exposed Jack McGurn as only an adequate fighter with a weak jaw who would never make it to the big time. Bootleggers, on the other hand, always needed more men, and Jack had the connections to find work with a group known as the Circus Gang, named that way because they operated out of the Circus Cafe, not because they were fond of big top shenanigans. They were affiliates of John Torrio's Southside Gang, better known as the Chicago Outfit, under the leadership of Torrio's protege, Al Capone. So that was it. McGurn completely left his old life behind and embraced the new one enthusiastically. He did whatever was asked of him, and although we don't know specifics, he was brought in for questioning multiple times on suspicion of murder. Then, after 2 years of raising hell with the Circus Gang, he got the call up to the big leagues. Al Capone wanted him to work for the Chicago Outfit. Mobs don't have a reputation for playing nice with each other, and during the 1920s, the gangs of Chicago were fighting it out in the so-called Beer Wars. When Capone recruited McGurn, his outfit's main rival was the North Side Gang, led by Jaime Weiss and Bugs Moran. Capone needed trusty shooters, and Jack McGurn fit the bill perfectly. He did whatever Capone told him to do without fear, hesitation, or remorse. In fact, one of McGurn's first and most prominent hits for Capone was none other than Jaime Weiss. The Northside gang leader had proven stubbornly hard to kill. Eventually, Capone placed the task of getting rid of Weiss in the capable hands of Frank Nitti, the man who would later succeed him as the boss of the outfit. Nitti's plan was to set up machine gun nests in locations that Weiss frequented and were suitable for ambushes, and then wait for the right opportunity. One of them was established inside a boarding house opposite Schofield's Flower Shop, one of the North Side Gang's headquarters. On October 11th, 1926, Weiss and 4 associates pulled up in front of the flower shop when a Tommy gun opened fire on them. At the other end was Jack McGurn, or at least that's what the police and people in the know have said. Of the 5 men, 3 were shot and 2 were killed, Jaime Weiss and his bodyguard, Patrick Murray. Following the hit on Weiss, McGurn was by the boss's side at all times. The pair would often hit the jazz clubs together or go out for a few rounds of golf, a sport which became a great passion for McGurn. Plus, whenever there was a major sporting event in Chicago, Capone and McGurn had the best seats in the house. They were there ringside for one of the biggest boxing moments in history, the long count fight in 1927 when Gene Tunney won the rematch against Jack Dempsey. Jack McGurn had become one of Capone's most trusted lieutenants. In 1927, Capone's biggest threat proved to be Joe Aiello, a former ally turned enemy. Aiello became a big shot in Chicago by taking over most of the businesses once owned by the Jennas, who were foolish enough to start trouble with both Capone and the North Side Gang. Eventually, of the 6 Jenna brothers, 3 were dead and the other 3 fled the city. We can't say if McGurn was involved in any of their deaths as revenge for his stepfather's murder, or even if he cared about that anymore. There's no denying that this McGurn was a completely different person from the kid who wanted to become a boxer 5 years earlier. Anyway, Aiello was initially on good relations with Capone, but they soured in 1927 when Aiello tried to become the new president of a highly influential Sicilian-American organization called the Unione Siciliana. Capone instead made sure his business partner Tony Lombardo got the position, so Aiello allied himself with the new boss of the North Side Gang, Bugs Moran, to take revenge. Aiello put out a massive bounty on Capone's head, which attracted attention from out-of-town hitmen, fell on McGurn to protect his boss, and he killed multiple assassins in 1927 who came to Chicago to claim the bounty, as well as local gunmen on Aiello's payroll. Around 10 of them, according to estimates. Lombardo, however, didn't have McGurn as his aegis, and he was gunned down in 1928, although this seemed to be Bugs Moran's doing rather than Aiello's. And Capone decided to take revenge on the Northside Gang in one of the most infamous events in mob history, the Valentine's Day Massacre. You've all heard this story. On February 14, 1929, 4 of Capone's men dressed up as policemen and pretended to arrest 7 of Moran's men. They lined them up against the wall and riddled them with bullets. We'd like to tell you what role McGurn played, but to be honest, we have no idea. It's almost certain that he didn't personally take part, since Moran's men would have recognized him. Some say he planned the whole thing and hired the shooters, but we can't say for sure one way or another. McGurn was arrested for it, but his girlfriend and eventual wife, Louise Rolfe, testified that he had been with her all day. It was Valentine's Day, after all. Newspapers dubbed her his blonde alibi. McGurn was charged with 7 counts of murder, and he was investigated for over 2 years, but eventually the state was forced to drop the charges against him. Although McGurn stayed a free man, his mob career was over. The Valentine's Day Massacre made Capone the undisputed king of Chicago's underworld, but it also made him the government's prime target. Elliot Ness and his Untouchables led an investigation against him, and if you want it, we have a bio on him available. Eventually, Capone was arrested in 1931 and sent to prison in 1932. Afterward, Frank Nitti was in charge of the outfit, and he despised McGurn. With Capone no longer there to protect him, McGurn was informed that his services were no longer needed. Still, he had his youth, his health, a young wife, and a fortune invested in multiple businesses. Things were still pretty sweet for old Jack, and he started a new career as a golfer. Bing Crosby even became a frequent partner. But it's shocking just how fast someone's luck can change. Nobody was immune from the effects of the Great Depression. One after another, McGurn's investments flopped. A nightclub he owned burned down, and his only business that was still profitable, the Green Mill Jazz Club, the mob decided to appropriate. By 1935, things got so bad that the bank foreclosed on McGurn's house and repossessed all of his valuables. Out of desperation, McGurn tried to get back into the outfit, but was rebuffed by Nitti. And that's when he made the biggest mistake of his life, because McGurn threatened to cause trouble with all of the information he possessed. He signed his death warrant with that remark, because from that point on, Jack McGurn was a marked man. Quite fittingly, his end came on Valentine's Day 1936. Well, it was after midnight, so technically February 15th, but you get the idea. McGurn was out bowling when 3 men approached him and shot him point blank. The 32-year-old McGurn was dead before he crumpled to the floor. Next to him was a Valentine card that said, "You've lost your job. You've lost your dough. Your jewels and cars and handsome houses. But things could still be worse, you know. At least you haven't lost your trousers." I hope you learned something today. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to deploy your likes, comment a gangster we haven't covered yet, subscribe and ring that bell if you haven't, and share this video with someone who loves learning about historical figures. I'm Eric Malachite, and we'll see you next time.